Well, hello, my name is Rachel Lee O'Brien, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our latest Astral Nova event with guest composer Steven Snowden. He is my Astral micro commission composer, and I will be premiering his new work, Walking with Spring, live in Philadelphia on April 10th. And this will be an exploration of the culture and music of rural Appalachia. So, Steven, it's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I couldn't be more excited to have Steve on board with me and presenting this amazing new work. And we'll mostly be talking about this piece throughout the duration of the interview. But first, I was hoping, Steve, that we could get to know you a little bit. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and where are you from, where do you live now, and what occupies your time these days?
Well, I'm originally from the Ozarks in southern Missouri, just north of Arkansas, like close to the border. And I've sort of lived all over the place, moved around a bunch, but currently and probably permanently, I'm living in Massachusetts. So my wife and I just had a baby 2 months ago. And we have a little place out in the country. We're about an hour outside of Boston. We're close to the New Hampshire border. We have a huge garden and a lot of space. We live across the street from a farm, and we love foraging and hiking. We're basically obsessed with mushrooms, identifying mushrooms, and we love, just getting out there and seeing all of the changes in all the life in the forest throughout the seasons, which is one of the reasons I really like New England. Although in the middle of winter, it does wear on me after a while. It's pretty cold. And otherwise, doing a lot of diaper changing at the moment. But for us, a lot of gardening, and I actually cultivate mushrooms as well. So I have a whole lab set up where I can grow gourmet mushrooms like oysters or lion's mane, that sort of thing. Because I like to pretend like I'm a scientist or something sometimes. And then otherwise I'm just writing music. And normally I would be, pre-pandemic, I was traveling around quite a bit as well. Haven't been doing so much of that lately, but it seems like a few things are coming up. And I'm excited to see some more live performances and get back to that, because that's something I really, really miss. And talking to audiences and working face to face with performers is something I really love. So I'm looking forward to that coming back.
Absolutely. Well, your music has received many awards and accolades, and I think it's because really of its distinct sound and style. I feel like as I've listened to your music more and more, it seems more and more to me that really is sort of like a juxtaposition of old and new for me. I feel like you really draw and love the old, like the folk styles and the folk cultures, but you also present it in such a new and innovative and sometimes wild way. And I would ask if you would agree with that, and if you could talk to us a little bit about your approach to music in that way, if that is sort of your approach.
Before college, I didn't really have much of a background in classical music. I didn't take like piano lessons or actually I took like 2 or 3 piano lessons right before I went to college, because I was like, oh no, I've got to learn how to play the piano if I'm going to go to college. I was a music education major first, before I eventually switched to composition. But my musical background is more like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, and I grew up around a lot of bluegrass music. I don't know, I just always really loved music, but I didn't have many opportunities to like hear an orchestra or go to chamber music concerts and that sort of thing. And the thing that turned me on to that was actually Frank Zappa. There's an album called The Yellow Shark that was recorded by Ensemble Moderne, and it's a chamber orchestra, and they're playing Zappa's music, which I was really familiar with, and I heard all of these incredible sounds that I'd never heard before. I was just thinking, like, a bassoon can do that, and that got me really interested in it. And I thought, man, there's just so many possibilities, and I just kind of ran with it from there. And I would say later on, someone who was hugely influential on me, a composer that really influenced me a lot, was George Crumb, who sadly recently passed away. But he he had something that I just couldn't quite put my finger on that really spoke to me in a way. And I think it might be that he grew up in a sort of a similar area. He grew up in Appalachia. And I'm not going to quote him directly because I'll probably get it wrong, but he said that every composer has like a sound, like an inner resonance. And for him, because he grew up in an Appalachian Valley, this sort of long sustained and echoing sort of thing that is so common in his music came from that, his childhood and growing up in that place and his connection to that place. And I feel kind of similarly. I mean, although the valleys in the Ozarks are a bit smaller than the ones in the Appalachian Mountains, but it's trying, like I want to try to be true to myself and my sense of like taste. Like this sounds good to me, so I should do it, and not let sort of outside things influence that too much. Other than like, is this actually possible to play? That's kind of important to be able to do that, but. I like to approach every piece and every instrument as if I don't know anything about it in a way. I mean, that seems kind of silly, but like I'm an alien from somewhere else who just happened to find this bass drum, and I know it's supposed to make sound, but I don't know how it's supposed to make sound. And so I try every possible way and tinker with it and come up with a lot of really useless ideas, but I might come up with a few really interesting things. And I also really love the sort of dramatic visual element of music as well, which is one of the things I love about writing for percussion. Harp obviously stands out. It's a very visual instrument. But I think that there's, as an audience member, the performance is like the sounds that you're hearing, but it's so many other things as well. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm composing too. Like I will sometimes write in sort of theatrical elements. And this is, again, is something that Crumb does. I think something that I learned from his music, like Vox Ballet, where they wear the masks when they're performing, and it's got this sort of mysterious theatrical thing. But it's a way to present not just sound and music to an audience, but it's a way to present a whole idea. And for me, that also includes storytelling, which is very common in almost every piece that I write. There's some sort of story that I'm telling in a sort of abstract form because it's almost always instrumental music. But I like to give the audience like a little bit of a direction, like maybe it's just the title, and it can give them a starting point to listen to that music and kind of make up their own mind about what it's really about, because everyone will experience it differently. But even just having a provocative or interesting title or some brief program notes can do a lot to transport that person in the audience to a different world within the piece. So that's an important thing for me as well.
The idea of storytelling is so central to folk culture as well. And so I think that really sets the stage really well for you as you write music based on folk music and folk cultures. The very first piece that introduced me to you was Appalachian Polaroids. And for those of you watching who haven't heard it yet, I would definitely encourage you to go look it up on Steven's website. It's a beautiful piece for string quartet and electronics. It incorporates a original field recording of a woman singing an Appalachian folk song. Steve, could you tell us just a little bit about that piece?
That piece, I wrote that piece for a group called the Aeolus Quartet, and they're still around. I mean, I wrote that I think it was over 10 years ago. We were all in school together at University of Texas in Austin. They were the graduate string quartet in residence, and they are all from parts of Appalachia. And they just wanted a piece that would reflect that in some way. And for me, being from the Ozarks, it's a very similar culture. Slightly older, smaller mountains in the Ozarks, but culturally there's a real connection there. And so the piece, for me, it was all about this kind of sense of, I don't know, like longing for home in a way. For me, having grown up in a very rural area, and like having that connection to nature all the time, and and then moving to like cities, living in cities. So at the time I was living in Austin, which maybe some people wouldn't consider that a huge city, but to me it was pretty big. And I wanted to write something that would reflect the joy and hardship of living an isolated rural life, because most people, at least that I was encountering, hadn't had that experience very much before, and I wanted to try to convey that in some way. And the sort of how do I put it? Some degree of like reverence, or at least respect, for people that do live like that, who are often like looked down upon. I think just for me also, as I come from a blue collar family, first person in my family to go to college, like I I've been on both sides of that. I have a doctorate now, so I'm like overeducated, and I've lived in a lot of big cities and things like that. So a lot of times people don't quite understand what that's like, and they just see it as maybe simple, or it's not something to be celebrated or respected. And so I kind of wanted to do that as well. The piece was inspired by the photography of a guy named Shelby Lee Adams, who he's still alive today, and he photographs. That's where the Polaroid part comes in. He took Polaroid pictures, but they're like the large format, old school Polaroid, kind of like older style camera, and they were portraits of people living mostly in Kentucky, in very rural, very poor areas. And the photography is fairly controversial, because some people call it like poverty porn, because these are people who live in extreme poverty. But I think it's done with respect in a way. I mean, he's not trying to make it look any worse or better than what it really is. And I felt like it kind of matched up with that as well. So yeah, and I wanted to. That was one of the first pieces I wrote. I think I was in school at the time, and when you're in school, you often, as composers, you feel this pressure to write things that are like complex or clever or complicated. Maybe you want to impress your teachers, or you're studying a lot of music from composers who write very complex things, like like Stockhausen or something like that. And on that piece, or when writing that piece, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to write exactly what I want to hear. I'm not going to think about teachers or anybody, even the audience or anything like that. I just want to, well, I take it back. I'm thinking about the audience, but like in terms of musically, what I did with it, it's like, there's nothing wrong with having a melody. Like, I'm just going to have a nice, pretty melody, and it's going to go on for a long time. And craft this thing that is, made with great care, but it's also something, and it is complex in a way. I mean, there is, if you look into the score, look, there are a lot of techniques. It's not an easy piece to play, but what I really wanted is for anybody, regardless of their musical background, to be able to hear that piece and experience it and grab onto something. Like, if it's someone who is used to, hearing like classical music, they're pretty melodies. And if it's somebody who's more into like experimental music, there's some of that in there as well. So yeah, really, piece was kind of a turning point for me. I think after that, I realized I should trust my gut and write what it is that I really want to write, and not really worry about impressing anybody, because that doesn't really get you anywhere. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, the piece is beautiful, and I immediately fell in love with it. I think I must have connected strongly to what you were saying about just the beauty of the rustic culture of Appalachia. I come from Appalachian heritage myself. I live in Virginia, and my ancestors were milk farmers and moonshiners. So, so yeah, and as I was sort of crafting the program for this upcoming recital in April, I really wanted to convey that idea of just the beauty of that, a culture that is not as seen, I think, and sort of pay homage to my heritage and So as I was thinking about that, I thought I really need to get you on board for this recital because it would be just so appropriate and perfect. So in the recital, I'm exploring, my heritage and the culture and the folk traditions and folk music, but there was one element that I felt like was missing, which is the landscape of Appalachia and specifically the idea of the Appalachian Mountains. It's something that I just grew up loving. I've hiked portions of the Appalachian Trail near my home so many dozens of times throughout my childhood, and I really wanted to really convey that idea through my recital. The Appalachian Mountains, a stunning mountain range. They span several states, and the Appalachian Trail connects them all from Georgia all the way to Maine. And the halfway, it's sort of pretty much the halfway point is Roanoke, Virginia, where I live. And some of the most beautiful points along the trail are right nearby my home. The three most beautiful, one of the most photographed actually, points along the trail is Mcafee Knob, and it's the most famous and most photographed and very, very stunning. But I really wanted to have a piece that highlighted some of the really beautiful places around Appalachia. And when I heard your music, I just thought, well, there's no other person I could possibly ask. You would do such a great job with it. And so that's when I reached out to you. So that's sort of my intro to my inspiration for the piece, but I'd love to get your thoughts on your initial start of your perspective for the piece and what you had in mind originally and how that eventually shaped into what we have right now.
So I haven't actually been on the Appalachian Trail before. I've spent a lot of time in Appalachia and like in mountains and that sort of thing, hiking around. I don't think I've actually I may have gone on the trail at some point, maybe in Georgia, I don't know. But but I do have a connection to Virginia, or at least it just keeps calling me back. I'm actually going there tonight. I'm going to Richmond. I just can't escape it. I think it's the gravity of the biscuits and gravy that keeps pulling me back to Richmond. But so I hadn't actually been to this part of the trail and seen these places in person. And so we were first talking about it. I love nature. It's, I think it's really important for us to learn a lot about it and to, respect it and all that sort of thing. I was looking at this and like, well, if I haven't actually been there, like, how can I write a piece about a place that I haven't been to in person? I mean, there's a lot of pictures, there's video, there are a lot of written descriptions and that sort of thing. And I thought, this is kind of like painting a portrait based on a description, like a sketch artist or something. And at first I thought, no, that's just not going to work. But the more I dug into it and the more I learned about like long distance hiking culture and just reading people's accounts of these places, I thought this could actually really work. I mean, that's an interesting idea. And what I could do to maintain my own personal connection to that with things that I like tangibly have seen before is to associate these places with living things that I see all the time as well, because we share, even though I'm all the way up in New England, we share a lot of the same flora, fauna, and fungus. And so I was actually thinking about, for instance, the fiddlehead fern, ostrich fern, and the ghost pipe or Indian pipe, just because they're, I think, really beautiful, and they come out in spring. And the title "Walking with Spring" is actually the same title as a book of poetry by Earl Schaefer, who was the first person to through hike the trail 2,200 miles. He did it in the same pair of boots, which I think is really amazing. And he kept a diary along the way and wrote a lot of poetry. And actually his boots and his little black book of notes and poetry are in the Smithsonian. Someone asked him, like, why did you decide to hike the entire trail, this 2,200 miles? And he's like, well, I just wanted to walk the war out of me, because he had been in the Pacific for 4 years in World War II. And it was in 1948, I think, that he hiked the trail. Right around there, 46, 48, something like that. And this idea of like communing with nature in such a what seems to be such an extreme way in order to like bring yourself back to center after experiencing something really traumatic like that. I really connected with that as well, because that's something that I'll do. Like if I like, that is always going to calm me down. If I go for a walk in the woods, you know, it changes my perspective in such a way where I think of myself as like, I'm part of this. Like I am part of this amazing network of life that exists here. And thinking of being a small part of a very big thing is actually very reassuring in a way. And that's actually the last movement is Mcafee Knob. And for that one, I really wanted to convey this sense of awe and grandeur that you can experience when you look out over something that's like so huge. In this case, this giant valley that you can see for miles and miles and miles. Or if you go to the ocean and you're able to just look out onto the ocean, I get a sense of that as well, where you feel so small. And like logically, I would think that would make me uncomfortable, but it doesn't for some reason. Just knowing that there is so much more out there than the world that I'm focused in on all the time. So sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place with this one here, but so I wanted to have, again, like that connection with nature as something that is, you know, that you can tell with the piece as well. So musically speaking, you know, really trying to represent that, not just the big stuff like the view from Mcafee Knob, but even the little things like the winding switchbacks leading to Tinker Cliffs, or this sort of mysterious, almost alien-like aspect of Dragon's Tooth, which is just this spire that it's like it doesn't even look like it belongs there, you know, like somebody put it there, but it's just a natural phenomenon. So I wanted to take those concepts and then find some way to represent those musically while still, you know, having, I don't know, like a satisfying or compelling piece to play and to listen to.
Right. Well, I think you do that really well, and sort of recapping just the idea of the broad and grand as well as the small and rustic and often overlooked. I think you've captured really well in the whole piece, both of those things. Tell us a little bit about the form of the piece. We have 3 movements, and what are those each about? Tell us a little bit more.
Each movement is named after one of these places, which I guess is normally referred to as the Triple Crown. One of many Triple Crowns around the world I found when I started Googling it, but this is this particular Triple Crown of 3 extraordinarily beautiful places along the Appalachian Trail. I wanted to, actually the order of the movements is based on the way that you would hike it. So if you were to hike the whole thing, I think it takes like 6 days or something. But I guess you could reverse it and you could still hike the trail. But so the first one is Dragon's Tooth, which, like I mentioned before, is this sort of mysterious spire just sticking up out of the ground at the edge of the forest. I mean, it's way up high as well, and you can climb to the top. And I associated that with ghost pipe or Indian pipe, Monoflora unitropa. Wait, is it Monotropa uniflora? I always get those mixed up. Anyway, because ghost pipe, for those of you who are familiar with it, is it lacks, it's a plant, but it lacks chlorophyll. So it's white or silver. Occasionally there will be some color to it, but it doesn't actually photosynthesize at all. It's a parasite. So it gets its nutrients from a fungal network from mushroom mycelium that are under the ground, and the mushroom mycelium get that energy from the trees, which use photosynthesis. So it pops up in the shade in areas where it's usually just leaf litter and it's dark and stuff, and there's this like white little flower. I mean, they're only like this tall, and it has a single little flower on the end. It kind of points downward, and for some reason it just reminded me of that. And they do look kind of like spooky in a way. So that one is very sparse. That movement musically is very sparse. It's very focused on one pitch, E sharp and F. So we're using that technique to have basically a drone throughout that movement, and then things just happen around that. So there's always this center of this pitch in the middle register, and then a lot of like harmonics and things that are up high, some things that are way down low, and it gives it this kind of ghostly sense to it. The second one is Tinker Cliffs, and for that one, I wanted to kind of reference a couple of things, one of which is just the act of hiking, because a lot of hiking, I mean, we take pictures at the most beautiful spots, but a lot of our time hiking is spent like under the canopy, hiking up switchbacks, and that sort of thing. And that's what the hike is like for much of like on the way to Tinker Cliffs. And then once you get there, it opens up into this beautiful view of, I think, of Catawba Creek. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Catawba?
Catawba, yep, you're right.
Okay, yeah. So I try to represent that musically as well. So it is a very kind of slithering, winding kind of piece. There's a lot of repeated figures that are all in a tight register, and there's a lot of muting and harmonics. And particular notes will actually ring out, but it takes a while, but it eventually opens up into the upper register with all the notes ringing, kind of representing that moment of when you reach the clearing at the cliffs and you can see out. And then the last one, Mcafee Knob, is I kind of already explained that before, but the sense of awe and wonder that comes from a view like that. Just being able to see for miles and miles, and getting a sense of the scale of the forest or of the valley, and how small we are in comparison to that. Like we're just a tiny part of a much bigger network of life out there. So that's what I was going for with that movement.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a feeling that is like none other when you're up there, past the tree line. Tell us a little bit about how you incorporated the idea of mountain dulcimer into your piece.
Yeah, I'm always kind of curious about like folk techniques, like styles of singing, or like fiddle playing, spoons. I've got them here. I got a pair. These are Quebecois wooden spoons. I don't know, I'm just kind of fascinated by these instruments that are relatively simple, and the technique used to play them is often quite simple as well, because that music serves a different purpose than what it might than like music played in a concert hall a lot of times. So in this case, I just think dulcimer, the mountain dulcimer, the Appalachian dulcimer, is just a really interesting instrument. It's very American. So from what I understand, it's most likely its predecessor was a German instrument that had 9 strings that you would play in a similar way, and it was fretted, and you could play like 1, 4, 5, 1, major minor chords on it. And then when it was brought over by immigrants, it made its way down south from Pennsylvania, I think, originally. This is just one account that I read. I don't know how true this is. It was just some dulcimer maker's website. So not a scholarly reference here, but it became simplified and eventually only had 3 strings, 2 of which were largely drones. So it became an instrument that you didn't need to be able to play like every major and minor chord on it. The purpose of it was to accompany storytelling and singing. And it needed to be portable, because people want to, take an instrument with them, and they're hiking up the trail, and they're, if you want to make music, you need to take your instruments with you, because you're probably going to be spending a lot of nights, camping out in the woods or whatever, getting from one place to another. So it's a very practical instrument. It's a very simple instrument, and it's one that, at least from what I found, that it's not seen as like a virtuosic kind of instrument. I say that, I'm sure there's some like mountain dulcimer virtuoso out there that does really complicated, crazy stuff. Would love to hear that. But most of what I've heard of the instrument is really just simple and straightforward. And that's all it needs to be. So I thought I would maybe figure out like some like techniques, like strumming techniques, or things that are unique to the dulcimer that I could incorporate into the piece with harp, because they are plucked strings, at least, they're similar in a way, and they have the, sort of resonant bodies, and that kind of thing. but ultimately, I realized that what I wanted to incorporate from the dulcimer is just this idea that it is a simple instrument that doesn't have to be anything more than that. You know, it's beautiful on its own. It is great at accompanying the voice, and it's not a specialist instrument necessarily. Like it's intentionally designed to be something that people can just pick up and play, even if you don't have much experience. So I really like that about it. I mean, I love complicated instruments too. You know, I love the piano. It's a beautiful sound, but it's not as accessible than as something that is, you know, cheap and portable like a dulcimer. So with the piece, what I wanted to do was one particular thing that I did that's similar to dulcimer music is the idea of a drone. So you have drone strings and a dulcimer. The first movement of this piece has a drone on E sharp and F, and everything's centered around that. I also wanted to stick with like sort of modal ideas, so there doesn't need to be a lot of chromaticism. Although the first movement, the pitch collection I'm using there is like not a typical like church mode or anything like that, but it's sticks with roughly the same pitches, so it's kind of like in the same sound world the whole time. And yeah, and just simplicity. Like it's I think with this piece for harp and dulcimer music, and I with a lot of stuff that I write, I'm not trying to impress people, because I think if you are trying to do that, then ultimately it won't really work out. It's a matter of being like really authentic about it. And so in this case, you know, I'm making as much use as I can of a few very basic musical elements and ideas, and utilizing them in every way that I can. And part of that also is inspired by Earl Schaefer and long distance hikers, which weight is really important. You can't carry an extra pan with you because you're hiking hundreds, thousands of miles.
Right. I hear they saw the handles off of toothbrushes just to make their packs that much lighter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a really great quote that I don't have in front of me, but if anybody who's like hiked a bunch on the Appalachian Trail or done long distance hiking has probably heard it before, but it's something like he once advised when long distance hiking to pack very little, but choose that very little with great care. I'm paraphrasing there, I don't think I've got it quite right. So in this case, musically speaking, that's what I'm doing as well. So the second movement, for example, I'm using a technique that I'd seen one piece that you showed me, and it was used in kind of a different way, but basically touching the strings at the harmonic nodes. So instead of you getting the full like pitch, the vibration of the full string, you get like half of that if you're touching at the octave, and it gets this kind of eerie quality, this eerie sound. Very, very beautiful, I think. But touching some strings with one hand and then playing figures with the other hand over that. And so you get a mix of harmonic pitches and then just regular sounding plucked pitches. And it's, I mean, that's what the piece is about. It does a lot of that. And I try to pace it in such a way where it's always interesting as it unfolds, but it feels very natural. And that's something I strive to do in pretty much all of my music is I want it to feel natural to the audience, that they're sort of being led on a journey, and it feels like it all fits together. But in that case, I could have also written in a bunch of like tapping or I don't know, like you pick up like some handbells or honk a horn, or I don't know. But I could have incorporated a lot of other things into that, but I wanted it to really focus on that because I thought that was a really worthwhile musical idea and technique. And I really wanted to feature that. And it also gives like that movement, and each of the movements really has their own atmosphere. It feels like it is a place. I mean, that's one of the things I'm trying to do as well, that it's like, it feels like you're really in a place. I mean, it's sort of one of sort of abstract sound and that sort of thing. But I think focusing on like choosing that little very well or with great caution, or however you put it. I've tried to do that musically as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that effect in Tinker Cliffs that you were talking about, with the harmonics, just sort of going back to your style of composing, sort of bringing in old ideas, but presenting it in a new way. And I thought that that was a really cool way of doing that. So he uses the idea of a harmonic, which is actually a very traditional harp technique. And I can show you it just, you sort of slice the string halfway here. And instead of it sounding like a normal string plucking, it sounds an octave higher because it sort of hits that sweet spot and hits that harmonic there. But instead of having me do that traditionally, he's asking me to touch those strings at the sweet spot, but then play them with my other hand, sort of like that. And so it gives that harmonic tone, but it's presented in a different way, in a much more rustic way, which I think is really cool. Just that idea of using the old but presenting in a new way. And also what I was really hoping that the piece would grow to become, appreciating both the grand, beautiful, traditional, but also the up close and nitty gritty, and sometimes often overlooked. And I think that for the harp, it's really, really cool to be able to use the full spectrum of the harp, not just the techniques we're used to using, but also just always exploring, always finding new ways to present and use it to its fullest capabilities. And those rustic sounds we don't get to play quite as often. But I think that's actually exactly what I was hoping for with the piece in general. Just that juxtaposition of earthy and majestic, right? The sweat it takes to scale a mountain, but then the glory of the view once you get to the top, right? Or the earthiness of dirt, or bark or roots, but then the glory of a bird's eye view, right? And I think that just in that technique alone, but throughout the whole piece, you've done that so incredibly well. And I personally cannot wait for the premiere, and it's been a joy to work on it. And I think it's going to be a beautiful addition to this recital on April 10th. So Steven, thank you so much for the piece, and also for meeting with me today and talking a little bit about it. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to chat with you about all this stuff. Yeah.
Well, I am again just so excited to be able to learn this and work with you. It's been such a joy and privilege to collaborate, and looking
Same.
forward to that premiere. So
Yeah.
thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.